levels of water across services to consider assess we should increase performance, yet some are missing its point.
That carbon footprint is about 16 times of carbon emissions.
What about COP26? What's COP?
The potential threat to the surrounding natural environment against the ocean. The UN is calling the world first climate change pact.
Scientists are correct in their fears that sure sign of climate change.
I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. On our warming planet, there are reasons for hope. We need to have the courage to try.
A lot more jobs created in the green economy.
Climate change is not the problem. Climate change is the expression of the problem.
Renewable energy technologies to fundamentally transform the energy system are at our disposal.
How do we begin the process of reversing global warming?
Launched the largest tree plantation campaign
It is now cheaper to build offshore wind
to
farms.
develop a climate-altering bomb.
Continually reinvesting in our grassroots. We are locked down in a
Critical moment that we cannot not be part of.
enormous opportunity in agriculture.
We can become stubborn optimists.
26 is one of the most important diplomatic gatherings in
Humanity already knows what to do.
Do it overnight, but we can set that yesterday.
We've got a long way to go.
But there is momentum.
Roll up your sleeves and do it.
Welcome, Chris.
Sorry to bring the room down after Jim's attempted uplifting you, that we need to wake up both figuratively, which we'll come on to, but also it is mid-afternoon, if not late afternoon now, and there's day one of the conference, so apologies, that's uncomfortable watching, I think you'd all agree, but we need to act, and really that's the key message that I want to try and get across in this next job. So I'm Chris, I'm the Supply Chain Sustainability Lead at the insurance company Aviva, and I'm going to talk to you about supply chain net zero as a focus today. But first, done a lot of listening today. I'm going to ask you each to warm up those hands, dominant or otherwise, and do a quick knowledge check. Okay, no use of apps here, so we're just going to go old school. So, firstly, it's multiple choice, so don't worry, you're not going to look too silly. How many of the UK's top 20 hottest years have been since the year 2000? You've got three options there: 5, 7, or 15. Can I see, or perhaps hear some suggestions? What do we think? 15, yeah, room of pessimists, but also realists, so that is right. And in fact, yeah, obviously last year, all of the top 10 since the year 2000. This one is a bit scary, but under an as-is scenario, this is a study done last year by an organisation which Aviva investors, our investment arm, actually supported. Under an as-is scenario, which hopefully will not transpire to be the case, what percentage of the human population may have to migrate due to life-threatening climatic conditions by the end of this century? We've got 9%, 21% or 75%. Any takers? It's 75%. Yeah, largely due to, absolutely, due to the intensity and frequency of life-threatening heat waves and also rising sea levels. 3/4 of the world population may have to leave their home. Okay, Paris Climate Agreement, we'll hear a bit more about that in a moment, but 194 parties have ratified that. Great start, I'm sure you'd all agree. 98% of, I'll say human emissions because I never pronounced the scientific version of that word, but have signed net zero into their law. How many? 15, 22, or all 194 of those parties? A bit of a mixed score on this one. Sadly, it is 15. UK is one of them, but as you can see, there's a long way to go between the transition of those high-level commitments made in 2016 and actually getting action on the ground in key nations. And also 194, how many are already certified net zero? I've got 0, I've got 2, or I've got 42. 0. As an S, there's 2, of course there are. So, yeah, Suriname and Bhutan in South America and Southeast Asia. I mean, landmass covered in large swaths of thick forestry, so I'm not saying it's climate action that's got there, but it proves it can be done. Okay, according to Carbon Intelligence, so bringing the meaning back to the room a little bit here, what percentage of a typical organisation's emissions are in their supply chain? Is it between 2 and 5%, 8 and 12, or 80 to 95%? Yeah, you're picking up on the rhythm here. It is absolutely, so 80 to 95%. Actually, for my organisation, it's not, because we have an investment arm, and actually they make up 90%, so I'm dwarfed by them in my challenge. But it's the reason that this event and sessions like this are important. The people in this room can absolutely make a difference. Making it individual, so what do you suspect the top action the average individual can take to reduce their own personal carbon footprint? Is it to switch to a renewable energy tariff, switch a car to electric, or take one less long-haul flight per year?
One less
It is actually to switch your car to electric. Clearly, this won't be the case if you don't commute or you take the train, but for the average individual, that is actually the case. Shortly followed, I would say, by the long-haul flight. Okay, we're nearly there. Okay, so China's emissions between 1990 and 2017 increased by 353%. But for the UK, what was that percentage? I've got 254%, 30%, or minus 35%. I'm a bit louder, guys. I'm hearing you. It's actually minus 35%. Okay, so again, due to sort of the widespread insulation of homes, phasing out of coal as the key power source, actually it has been possible to reduce. Unfortunately, the way in which emissions are calculated, there is so international travel and imports are grey. So China's picked up our emissions basically, but we can report having gone down. And finally, it's not technically a net zero question, it's a different environmental issue, but in the year 2000 at its largest because it varies in size throughout the year, there's a few different ozone holes, but the Antarctic ozone hole was about 30 million square kilometres. Last year, what was its maximum size? I won't read them all out, but 24. Correct. And so the reason I would like to finish on those two is there is hope in all of this as well. So it shows that collective human action can make a difference. The ozone hole is shrinking, and we can do something similar when it comes to carbon emissions. So you've heard all about the UN Sustainable Development Goals already from James. A member of this, I won't even try to seek to do them justice. He already has. But suffice to say that we're going to focus on climate action in this one. I do find this as a useful model against which to frame any conversation in sustainability, because the topics and things within are so broad that you can find yourself asking the question, is what I'm doing actually improving our sustainability posture as an organisation? Aviva, so if you look at our non-financial disclosures, we support 8 directly, arguably 11 of those, but we are going to focus today on climate action. Okay, so a bit of Net Zero 101. Apologies, this may be old news for some of you, but just to sort of ensure a foundation level of knowledge, a quick bit of information about that. So I've already mentioned the Paris Climate Agreement. Hopefully that's not the first time you've heard of it. So kind of recognise this point that the challenge of the enormous challenge of climate change is not something that can be tackled by one single nation or a group of nations alone. It requires international cooperation of the highest level. And they've been successful now. So this is today's number, 194 parties, representing 98% of human emissions have signed the Paris Accord. And the main goal of that, I won't really talk about 2 degrees because you won't hear a lot about that now, but it's to drive a 1.5 degree outcome. So that being the average temperature above pre-industrial levels, which generally accepted to be the latter half of the 18th century. Now, 2 things at the bottom there which are a bit stark. The first of which I'm sure won't be news, but so in order to hit that 1.5 degree outcome, the world at large needs to become net zero, which I'll explain a bit more about in a moment, by 2050. However, the more stark and much more immediate concern is that in order to hit that 1.5 degree outcome, deliver Paris, emissions need to be cut by 50% by 2030, 6.5 years away. Last year they went up. Okay, so just think about the enormity of that challenge and the influence in this room and the difference that you can have. So what's net zero? People say, oh, what's the problem here? I've been carbon neutral for decades. Aviva ourselves have been carbon neutral since 2006. What's the difference? So carbon neutral in its construct, whilst is technically regulated, doesn't drive any specific carbon outcomes, is probably the easy way. So in essence, I could buy enough carbon offsets, which then go to good causes, no doubt, but may not necessarily have any carbon impact, and declare myself to be carbon neutral. With net zero, that's not possible. So you first have to reduce your emissions to a range of around 85+%, and then sequester the rest. So we're not talking carbon offsets, we're talking natural carbon solutions or sequestration to achieve a position of net zero. Only then can you declare yourself net zero. Enter science-based targets. So in the same way that Paris sought to bring together the governments of the world to engender some collective action on climate change, the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and there are others, seek to recognise the fact that governments can't deliver this alone. Absolutely, big business has a key role to play in the transition to a net zero world. It's well founded, as you can see by the names on that list, and what it seeks to do is provide organisations with a framework against which to set targets to become net zero in the same way that organisations and as Jim says, cities already can. So what does it commit you to do? So as you've already heard, become net zero by 2050 at the latest in support of the Paris Climate Agreement, with targets which are grounded in the scientific method. So again, moving away from carbon neutrality. It also requires you to look at your full scope of emissions, so scope 1 and 2, which would be generally considered your direct emissions, so energy consumption, your operational emissions, but also relevant scope 3 categories. There are 15, I won't go through them, but any organisation that has over 40% of their emissions in their scope 3 has to go on to also set scope 3 targets. So it's not just the case of you can make your office energy efficient and declare yourself to be a net zero company. And you have to report. It's not just a case of setting the targets, taking the PR benefit of doing so, and then walking off into the sunset singing Kumbaya. There's a rigid annual reporting cycle attached to that, and as previously said, it's all grounded in scientific method. So what have Aviva committed to do? So in March 21, Aviva committed to become a net zero company by 2040, 10 years ahead of the Paris the latest date. Also to reduce the carbon intensity of our assets on the investment side by 60% by 2030, ahead of full net zero by 2040, and 25% by the middle of this decade, which we're well on course to doing. I think the 60% is going to be much more of a challenge. And then the bit that really interests me, / keeps me awake at night, is to have net zero operations and supply chain by 2030, which I was not consulted on, I'll add. We've set an interim target in December last year, which got approved in December, to have 70% of our spend to be with organisations who have approved science-based targets by November 25. I won't touch on this too much because the presentation next talks a bit about decarbonisation journeys, but the reason I like to show this slide is that it's not rocket science actually. If you deal with your travel, if you deal with your energy, if you deal with your ways of working, you can really go quite some way to reducing your own scope 1 and 2, the direct emissions, and then you can, with more credibility and more clarity of mind, go and engage your supply base on what they need to do to support you on that journey. So to this end, what do we ask of our suppliers? So we introduced last year, in July of last year, a mandatory condition of business that for any contract worth 1 million GBP or more, the organisation must have an approved science-based target or commit in their contract with us to go on and get one. Now, our exec were nervous about this. They've got operations they need to deliver. They've got 10% inflation to wrestle against. They've got supply chain resilience, as a major issue, as many in this room have. So to come along with additional ask, although I would argue not necessarily a competing ask, did cause a lot of nervousness. The findings could not have been more different. So standing here today, we've to date had 2 exceptions to that. In a pool of contracts, around 50 contracts, £1 million to be signed since July last year. So we were pushing on much more of an open door than we thought we were going to be. And another key point I will just touch on, the point of SBTI is it gets, so my supplier front door becomes cleaner, but also this gets that supplier in the SBTI track to then go on and talk to their suppliers. Now, what this does not guarantee is that those organisations will become net zero companies by 2050 in the same way that they're agreeing to by setting these targets. However, what it does is it ensures directional alignment with Aviva. They are demonstrating to me in a legally binding way that these things are important to them as an organisation, as they are to Aviva. We attempted to measure supply chain emissions, even at a high level, a couple of years ago, and we've engaged the market quite a few times since, and I can tell you it was a giant waste of time at this point. The maturity of the supply data, the accuracy of the data is not there. So, if you take one message away from today, if this is something that you are looking to introduce in your organisation, do not get paralysed by the lack of data. Take action, and you can worry about the data later, probably in the second half of this decade. And when someone cracks that market, buy shares quickly because everyone is going to want that data. Supplier selection, so where we had none before, though it might be surprising, we introduced climate-related questions into our tender exercises. We introduced a 10% weighting, which got relatively little resistance to. This year I'm trying to increase that to 20%, which I'm getting a lot of resistance to. And we also introduced product-level questions, so whilst the battleground for today is to ensure directional alignment on things like science-based targets, I do want to get to understanding from my suppliers, this thing that I'm buying from you, what's the environmental impact of it? What levers do I have as a buyer to reduce that? Can I have it slower? Can I have it in different packaging? Can I pay more for it? And in doing so, realise a reduction in our shared carbon footprint. So we introduced those questions looking to kind of press ahead of the data challenge slightly. We also use EcoVadis, which there are other ESG ratings providers out there, but the idea of that for us is just to pushing beyond targets and net zero to get a more holistic lens as to our suppliers' ESG posture. And we maintain a red list for organisations that either say no to our SBTI ask, say no to our EcoVadis ask, or get an EcoVadis report but it's got a really low score. And you heard from Deutsche Bank earlier, they use, amongst many others, their gateway into the supply chain is through EcoVadis report, so you need to get the report and have a minimum score in order to be a supplier of a contract over certain value with them also. It's all backed up, plenty to talk about contracts today, so I'll not labour the point, but Chancery Lane project, if you haven't looked at it, is a great resource bank. Also speak to your partners on this, is what I'd say. So Salesforce, one of my least favourite suppliers, no one in the room from Salesforce, actually leaders in this space, surprisingly. We are a customer of theirs, not, at times not a very happy one, but they sent me up a session with their procurement guys who've been doing this for a while. They also have a SBTI mandate, and we stole their contract clause, combined it with some stuff from Chancery Lane, and now we have a product which goes into our contest. And our suppliers ask us about, where did you develop this, how did you develop this, and how can they go on to use it. Supply chain diversity, you've heard plenty on this already, and tomorrow also, but for us, again, surprisingly, this was, we're coming from a bit of a standing start. I couldn't say to my CPO last year even how many SMEs we used. I now can, but for us, that's just the very first lens on supply chain diversity. Do we have a problem or not? What are we aspiring to in this space? How can we develop social value? Because if by some miracle of human endeavour we managed to achieve a net zero 2050 outcome that 0.5 of the world's population have all the wealth, then what have we really achieved? And then finally, we do support our suppliers. So someone said earlier, it shouldn't all be thou shalt, and I absolutely agree. One of the top responses we get to our asks in this space are, would love to, and this is important to us, but I don't know where to start. And then, to that end, we try to provide a resource. We developed a supply guidance pack. We ran a summit last year. We've run supply training. EcoVadis do that for us as well. And just trying to reinforce that message around collaboration. This is not a competitive issue. And finally, no one else is going to solve this for us. The people sitting in this room, our generations, will crack this, or we won't. No one else is going to do that for us. Moreover, the people in this room on the buy side, on the sell side of advisory, can have a positive influence on the issues that we discussed today. So, kind of closing thoughts really were, if you're not talking about this already to your partners, whether buy side, sell side, you should be. Understand your own organisation's credentials, give you that credibility to go and have that conversation with confidence. Add carbon to the time, cost, quality triangle. Be the person in the room that raises it when no one else does. And absolutely prioritise by materiality. So have no shame in just listing your suppliers by spend and working down the list. We've got 100 other priorities, and this is just one of them. So absolutely, the prevailing convention is work by materiality. Yes, it might not be an exact representation of your emissions profile when we come to get data later in the decade, and you can change tack there. But for now, just engage by materiality, absolutely my advice. Sourcing professionals. So we've been thrust into the limelight on this. As you heard earlier, average organisation, upwards of 90% of their emissions in their supply chain. So suddenly, this absolutely can be the new value frontier for sourcing professionals in my eyes. So when you're articulating the value of your function to the CEO, to the COO, absolutely, if this isn't already on the scorecard, then it should be, and you can make it part of the way in which you articulate the value being delivered. And then finally, on a bit more of a personal level, don't leave it out the door is what I say. So if I was to, again, show of hands in this room, how many people this winter tried to avoid turning their heating on? So most people, it was expensive, so that's fair enough. But, how many people have reduced their single-use plastic consumption? Like most people. How many people in this room have done something in the last 5 days at work to move us to a lower carbon future? 3. Why? That would be that's the closing thought that I'd like to leave you with. Both in your professional life and in your home life, you're ideally positioned to make it. Thanks, guys.